I'm so excited to be introducing my guest today, MacArthur Foundation Genius Award winner and one of the top composers around today, Bright Sheng. Bright Sheng is respected as one of the leading composers of our time whose stage, orchestral, chamber, and vocal works are performed regularly by the greatest performing arts institutions throughout North America, Europe, and Asia. He was born in Shanghai, China, and moved to New York, where he pursued his graduate work and studied composition and conducting privately with his mentor, Leonard Bernstein. Sheng has been teaching composition at the University of Michigan since 1995, where he is the Leonard Bernstein Distinguished University Professor of Music. He is also IAS Helmut and Anna Pao Soman Professor at Large at the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology, which he directs the Intimacy of Creativity Festival, HKUST Music Alive concert series, and other arts-related activities. Bright, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
You have such an amazing story because you were raised in the midst of the Cultural Revolution in China. But even before that, I just want to talk about your musical upbringing. You've said in an interview, "I didn't think I could be a musician. My family isn't a musical family." You've stated that your father was a medical doctor and your mother was an engineer. So were they surprised that you had musical aptitude?
Well, actually, when I was very young, I took some piano lessons, and I wasn't that interested because I had to practice. And so, as you know, all kids would like to kick balls and on the street,
right,
rather than sitting at the piano practicing. So I wasn't that interested until after the Cultural Revolution started. And they took away the piano. Then all of a sudden, I kind of missed the piano. So that's a kind of lesson. What for young people that don't take things that you have for granted,
right,
when they could be taken away, and then you will miss them.
Now you mentioned that you said I started with the Little Thompson books, played Tchaikovsky, Chopin, things like that, until the Cultural Revolution started and the Red Guard came and took away the piano. Can I ask you a question? So, do you have perfect pitch?
Yes, I do. But, at my age now, it starts to kind of slipping away.
Can you describe your piano teacher when you picked it back up again? Do you remember anything of those lessons?
Yes, the teacher was a very nice teacher. She was, during that time, was very few of kind of very sincere Catholic. She actually, I spoke to her just recently when she's still in Shanghai, lives in Shanghai, and she has a very nice way of teaching. But I don't think she was considered the best kids teacher, and none of us, the family, was very serious about cultivating me into becoming a musician. It was just a hobby and some kind of part of the education.
In that time, were you listening to music on vinyl or radio growing up? And I know you mentioned that you were listening to the folk music around you and the music around you. What were some very important things, or what things were you constantly listening to as a child?
Well, most during that time, before the Cultural Revolution, there was a little bit of Western classical music, mostly some Chinese music. My father had a few LP collection, like a record. We had a gramophone, and he would play every once in a while some classical music. And I wasn't completely drawn to it, I have to confess. And that was something I was curious about. But I wouldn't say I growing up in a very strong musical environment like my daughter is now.
At a certain point, because you had some musical training, you were sent to Qinghai in Tibet. And do you know the turning point when you started to take music very seriously?
Well, that was actually, how young people are, especially in the early teens, when you start the puberty. And that is a very important turning point. And then I remember after they took away the piano, then I missed the music. Then I was actually going try to play the piano all the time. So I would go to school. Unfortunately, my school actually had a few pianos, beat up upright pianos, and I would just go there and play. And then the teachers didn't like the kids playing on the piano, so they put a lock on the piano, and then I broke the lock, and I continued to play. And so that's how. And then I gradually got into there's some called a propaganda. Kids for propaganda. It's in a way it's like the talent show now in kids, in primary school. And then I got into that. Then I could sort of play at school when there's a piano available. And I remember I was so drawn to it by then. I was so serious, and I didn't have a piano, so I made a keyboard. And practiced on cardboard at home. And I remember when they told myself, I said, when I grow up, no matter what I do, I would never forget about music. I made a promise to myself. Now, at that time, I was 13, maybe, and that was an important turning point, I think. So when the opportunity presented itself to me a few years later that I could be a quote unquote professional musician. That means I could just play the music all day and still, making a meager living. I said, well, what else is better? So I went to Qinghai.
Most people in English-speaking backgrounds, they know about Beethoven, they know about Mozart, they know that these are famous composers. In China, is there such a thing? Are there famous Chinese composers that all households know and throughout history, going back hundreds of years? Are there famous operas that the average person would know?
Well, Chinese opera, there's Mei Lan Fang, and then there was, and then he was very famous. So his name was known, and there's maybe some Chinese composers, not much, but we also knew Beethoven, the name Beethoven, and Mozart that time, because I was in Shanghai. It's more like a middle class Hong Kong or Singapore, and my family was sort of at the time was like a middle class family. So I knew the name and probably had heard a couple of symphonies.
There's a composer called Huang Tzu, I think, who was Western educated, and he had some songs, but he died very young. Were you aware of these, I guess, Western educated composers who came back?
No, that was later when I became, when I went back to the Shanghai Conservatory. And then, by then, these names were known. But those are the names still, to this day, are very limited within the professions, but not a popular name. But now, for example, the Butterfly Concerto, everybody knows. But I don't think people would know the composer's name that well. But they've probably heard of the Violin Concerto.
Now, I want to turn to your comments about self-teaching, which I find fascinating. You said this: I was essentially self-taught. Because I didn't have a teacher, I was forced into a situation to be self-taught. So I created this habit of listening to tapes, watching other people play, take one lesson once a year in Shanghai. I think that was very helpful. So you self-taught yourself. You really were interested, and you were just grabbing everything you could grab.
Yeah, when you're young and you realize you're not good enough, yet you're being used as the best because there's no one could do better, and you're eager to learn. That's a situation that you feel it's kind of. It was common during the Cultural Revolution, but it was. In Qinghai, the place, there were not many, great pianists or teachers. So I had one lesson with a pianist who graduated from a conservatory in Xi'an, who was on the older generation in Qinghai, in the group that the music and theater group that I was part of it. And he gave me one lesson. He said, "This kid is too smart. I can't teach him anymore." And he told them and to send me away. So I was sent to Xi'an, which for a year and a half, and to study with Xi'an was the best of northwestern part of China. They call it Xibei Wusheng, which is five provinces. So I did there for a year and a half. So that gave me some foundation, some basics of music training. And when I went back, and I was indeed then the best, but still not good enough. So I continue to learn, take lessons, and watching. By then, I sort of figured out how to learn by yourself. I got a box of music scores that sent to me through Hong Kong, Mozart and Beethoven and Bach, and I still have these books with me. They're published by Schirmer, G. Schirmer, those yellow page music publisher, and Schirmer is my.
I know, does that amaze you that your name is now in the same catalog?
Yeah, that is amazing.
By the way, are you a very good sight reader when you were young? So you had no problem taking these scores and reading them and absorbing from them?
Yeah, little by little, because you're self-taught, you have to be a good sight reader. You can't just go. When you're very young, you play by the ear, but after a while, you really sight read it. And I was pretty good sight reader, yes. And then I tried to get some recordings from the pieces I was interested in, and I just listened to some and just play, and just like that. The problem with that is I wasn't taught how to practice properly. That is a very important step that's missed. So you have the result, and have the music, and I just try to imitate. So that was the way to how to practice. For example, the piano, how to practice the piano properly, that came later. I was also percussionist, and the teacher also a very good teacher, but they didn't teach me how to practice.
They just kind of let you do it on your own?
They show you how to move, how to play this and play that, but they didn't have a method that to practice, which is a very important step for kids, but which I had to kind of relearn later, years later. Yeah.
You were hanging out with these folk musicians and folk singers. I guess you could say you had a classical training. What was it like observing and playing music with people who are very natural musicians like this, who have a tradition that they are calling upon? Yeah,
well, at the time I wasn't. Yeah, I sort of subconsciously, maybe a little bit self-consciously, thinking that I was a classically trained musician. But I was just curious about music in general. I wasn't thinking so hard about the difference between the two genres of music. Mostly it was about music in general. I found the tune, they sing these folk songs, and some of the songs are quite beautiful and interesting. And exotic, mostly I found them more exotic than beautiful. And I just sang with them and spend time with them. And so that was very interesting, because music, like anything else, as a part of culture, is not an isolated, independent genre. It's part of life. So over there, folk song was part of their life. And they sing because they're happy. They sing because they're sad. They sing because they fall in love. So, that was part of life, and then you kind of naturally pick up these nuances.
And what point did you go to the Shanghai Conservatory? Was that after Qinghai?
After Qinghai, after the Cultural Revolution. Right. So I was the, first generation of people went back to college, the first year,
Did you start to compose? When did you actually start putting notes? Were you always a composer, or did you pick it up seriously at a certain point?
No. When I was in Qinghai, I was supposed to be a pianist and a percussionist, because they need a timpanist to play with the little chamber orchestra. So I was sent to study composition and not composition, I mean percussion and piano and some theory. I took in Xi'an. I was given a very good teacher who was trained in Eastern Germany, and who gave me some basic conducting tips and ear training, sight singing, how to read music, how to train yourself, and all that. I remember he told me an interesting story. He said, when you have these long rides on the train, the train goes, has some kind of rhythm.
Yep.
And you don't beat with the rhythm. You make that as a offbeats. See if you can keep this. Train yourself as a offbeats. And I remember, doing that. And so when I went back, I wasn't thinking about writing. But then, naturally, I start to improvise. I start to write tunes, write songs, and I found, writing is kind of fun, and I can write good tunes.
And was it not your mature style, but what kind of music were you improvising and composing?
Mostly folk style, folk songs, and during the Cultural Revolution, the so-called revolutionary songs with some kind of folk style. I was doing that, and somebody would write some text, and I would set them to music, and I wrote it down. By then, I know sort of basic notation. And people, would sing, and people would, and then later on, I was writing some dance music for orchestra, and would copy the music. People would sing, play right away. So, because they were eager, they didn't have somebody who could do all this. So, whatever you did, they'll play for you. That was also an interesting practice.
Your studies took you eventually to the United States, and you eventually found yourself in New York, and you studied privately with Leonard Bernstein. And let me just read you a quote that you said. You said, "The most profound thing that he taught me was that one has to be oneself. You should learn from others, but you have to come up with your own synthesis." Because he himself was an example. At that time, everybody was writing avant-garde music. He stuck to his guns. He stayed to whatever he believed. Now, how did you meet him, first of all?
I was a student at Tanglewood, and then he was the maestro who came to conduct. And we had a few of us were young composers. We had this idea, said, why don't we just invite all the big names, the biggies, to dinner, and we make them dinner and invite them. So it's a very charming thing. So they would approach these conductors, and the composers would invite you to dinner. Would you like to go? And they all came. Most of them had time. They came. And then we made some food, and that's how we met.
How did you approach him for private lessons?
Then we sort of we spent, Bernstein, I think of that year, spent 2 weeks at Tanglewood. So we met quite regularly. For 2 weeks, so we became quite fast friends, not just with me, with all the young composers. And Tanglewood is a place that you don't have stars and students. Everybody was kind of equal in a way, and it was you could meet, and there's no barriers, and there was really still to this day. So it's kind of a great place to feel like, even as you a youngster. By then, I was only 3 years off came to the U.S. So it was, everything was just so exciting, so refreshing, and the music making level was so high. It was just amazing, like a dream come true, like a heaven, music heaven. So I absorbed as much as possible. And then Bernstein invited us. I think the 4 of us were living in New York, and there were 8 of us. He said, so now you're on my private list. and you can come to my rehearsals. Those days, people, orchestra would travel to New York to rehearse with him before the tour. For example, if Vienna Philharmonic would having a North American tour, they would come 2-3 days earlier to rehearse with him, and then they have the tour. Rather than, he would flew to Vienna and then bring the orchestra. So it's quite a different situation. And so I went to all the rehearsals, and I think all of us went the first rehearsal in the fall, and then I was the only one continued to go because I thought this was just amazing to hear him conduct. It's a great opportunity to study. I guess the rest of them thought, okay, now he was doing Mahler. We are composers. We don't write like Mahler. So they stopped going. So that's how I kept going. And then he would say, he said, do you happen to have a new work in your briefcase you can show me? I said, no, sorry, the first time. But the next time I made sure I had something to show him. So that's how we became friends.
Do you remember his reaction to your first piece that you showed him?
He would say, after the rehearsal, he would say, do you have a piece? I say, yeah, today I do have a piece. So, and he would look at it. He said, okay, well, come for lunch. You have time for lunch? And he would brought me back to Dakota where he lived, which is not very far from Lincoln Center. And he would say, have lunch. So I had free lunch, which is a great lunch. and then we would talk about music and all that. So little by little, that became a norm. It happened quite often. I said, well, can I just officially study with you? Can you just teach me? And he said something interesting, because I was also interested in conducting, not only composition. We talked about conducting a lot as well. He said, I can teach conducting because I was trained at Curtis by Fritz Reiner, and he said, I learned all this. But I never studied composition, he said. He said, I don't know how to teach composition. I said, amazing. You never studied composition. I can't believe you wrote all these pieces. He said, I know, but the closest was Aaron Copland, who would give me comments. He said, Aaron could be very harsh.
You knew Aaron Copland, right? Because I saw a picture of you shaking his hand on your website.
Yeah, that was Tanglewood. When I was, that year, it was 85. He came out at Bernstein, did the Aaron Copland concert. He came out, and so that was, that was good. And in any case, so I said, well, can you do the same thing to me? And Aaron did to you. And he said, okay. So that's how we officially was together as teacher and students.
You said here when everybody was writing avant-garde music, he stuck to his guns and stayed to whatever he believed. Where was your compositional instincts taking you, and what were his comments to your direction, and how did he influence your direction and musically? Yeah,
this is a very good question. At the time, I was studying at Columbia, which is also primarily avant-garde music. And he knew that, but he also saw the other side of me, which I had pieces that I wrote with folk music style. I had the lyrical side. I think that was part of the thing that he saw in me, that he thought I was hopeful. So he finally, he would say, he said, one day you have to figure it out, the harmony, what do you do with your tonality and all that. He said, the stuff you're doing with the folk songs, it's a good way to sort of get into it, but it's not enough. You have to one day figure out the fundamentals. What do you want to do with the harmony, with the with the tonality and all that. This tonal versus atonal. That was very overwhelming at the time, discussion. So you either tonal or atonal composer, so you can't have both. But he also understood, I think, the way, because I was also interested in conducting as a performer, and I kept playing the piano, in classical pieces, Bach, Brahms, and all that. So he also understood that the best way for me to understand music was to introduce me to study more the understanding of classical music. So we talked a great deal about Mahler and Brahms and Bach and Hindemith and all these composers. And that was a very important part of my education. Finally, I don't think he was pushing me to do one way or the other, but he certainly was leaning towards, now thinking back, that he was certainly leaning back toward me to open up a little bit. Don't be, essentially so stuck up with one kind of avant-garde music, which I was the way that was taught at every school at the time. And so eventually it happened on my own. I made a link. I think my music started to have a break that I felt I could really, as a young composer, today too, I feel, only performers also perhaps, is that you feel you have a lot of things to say as a musician, to express, but your technique is not good enough to make you free of expression. So you're hindered by all these barriers, because you technically, as a performer, you have to get the notes right. As a composer, you have to, how do you express yourself through, effectively writing the music? I think my first break at it, I felt I could do that more freely, was when I started to make connections with classical music. That the same way thinking, a wavelength of classical composers like Beethoven, Brahms, and all that, and also because the influence of Bernstein, I paid more attention studying classical music at school, and that was very important, and on my own as well. So mostly on my own, as a self-taught. So, and then that connection was very important.
Before we move on, do you have a favorite Bernstein moment? That it could be a personal moment, it could be a musical moment. Do you have a favorite moment with him?
Well, there are many. There are many. I think recently I've been thinking about the story. It was very interesting because I had my first small success in New York. I was commissioned by a small new music group. Wrote a small piece called what is called? It's two Song Dynasty poems.
Two poems from the Song Dynasty for soprano and chamber orchestra.
Poems of Song Dynasty. You know the title better. Yeah, and
1985.
That piece, for 13 instruments and a soprano, and it was done well. It was well received, and it had first New York Times review and favorable, and I was very happy. So I brought the score, and I brought the recording, and I brought the review and to him for my lesson, hoping, he would be very happy to me. And the piece, now looking back, there's something good about it, but it wasn't completely myself, So after he listened to this, instead of saying anything, he said, "Could you tell me something? Whom do you writing this piece for?" So then I said, "What do you mean?" And he picked up a pen and wrote in the cover of the score. He said, "To whom is it written for? To whom it is written?" And then I couldn't answer. Then he explained. He said, "Well, Is it right? You wrote this for yourself, or for your colleagues, or for the conductor who commissioned you, for the audience, or for the players, for the singer, whom? I said, well, sort of a little bit for everybody, everything. But he raised a very important question, which is, what is, as a musician, because at the time I was a struggling student, and he was, the most famous musician in the world, perhaps classical music, and there was miles apart between us. So, but he asked a very important question. He's essentially asking, as a young musician, you want to survive, you want the society to support you. That means you expect the support, you hope the society will support you. But what is your responsibility in return to the society? So, so to whom it is written is a very important question. I couldn't answer. I mean, in a way, you could answer some superficial questions, but it is a very important question. Now I sometimes start my lecture, public lecture, with this question to the young composers.
Let's talk about your orchestral piece, Hun, Lacerations, which was your first orchestral commission. Now, your mother, who suffered greatly during the Cultural Revolution, said that when she first heard it performed, the work reminded her of all the pains and anguishes she experienced during the Cultural Revolution, but since forgotten. And a Jewish lady who heard a New York Chamber Symphony performance of it, she told you that if you had changed the title to Holocaust, the work would be equally appropriate. Now, can you talk about how long it took you to write the piece, and just tell me about how it came to be once you got the commission?
Well, I knew I wanted to write something about the Cultural Revolution. In other words, tell the world about my experience about the Cultural Revolution. And I was writing, and at the beginning I was thinking about writing a tune, but not starting with a tune, but I say eventually it will merge into a melody. And, no matter what I did, and the melody seemed out of place, seemed wrong context in this content of the Cultural Revolution. So I finally decided to write a composition without melody and based on a half-step motif. And it's very hard to pull this together. At the time, I was also aesthetically thinking about all this dissonance stuff, that we talked about, because during that time, the avant-garde, you cannot write a consonant, you cannot write an octave, you cannot write a fifth. You have to write these dissonant intervals. And I said, well, can I do something with this, still make it sense? So I decided to try, and through this life experience, maybe I could do something. So I think I succeeded in a way that technically it was a piece that efficient enough to express myself without a tune, the pain and the chaos and anguish and even the sadness of living through the Cultural Revolution.
Did the piece have any musical, like from a technical standpoint, harmony-wise, did you look at any older pieces to inform you, to get like some of those very dark, scary chords? Did you have did you draw on any past compositions from other people or your own works?
No, that was a very interesting piece. I think that's part of the reason why it was a success, because nothing, besides what I was taught at school, I really didn't, yes, at the time I listened to a lot of Mahler, but, it's so far away from Mahler, the piece, in terms of style. But maybe the expression, there are some expressions that I got from Mahler naturally. But the piece itself, in terms of harmony, in terms of way to write without melody. Mahler tune is very important, in Mahler. But so all that, it's somehow kind of, for some reason, I had this anguish that I wanted to do something. And I wasn't really consciously wanted to do something that nobody has done, but basically I just set out to do it in a very naive way, so to speak. And I think that was very interesting, where I remember most of the times to this day that the moments that I was thinking about these ideas and all that. But I would not know how those came to me. But I was kind of decided to keep doing a few things. I want to work on the long phrasing. So it's interesting when there's no melody. How do you work on the long phrasing? Now, that's something I learned. So I think Western music, I realized Western music, long phrasing is a very important element. I remember talking to my friend Tong Ye, who is now in Singapore, music director of the Chinese orchestra. And I was talking to her. I said, I was writing this piece. He said, we talked about long phrasing. He said, that is very important. He said, if you can keep the phrase very, very long. So I did. I think I did very long. I remember afterwards he listened to the piece. He said, yes, the phrasing is very long. He eventually also played this piece. So I think that was part of it. And then the other thing is, how do you make a sense that structurally? And that was not something special. But I think that part of that was Mahler Third. Shortly before, I think when I was writing, Bernstein played Mahler Third, and how the symphony has 6 movements and all leaned toward the last movement, which is this adagio movement, So I finished with a real long lament in lacerations, in the slow. So I think that was the influence.
Okay, let's talk about 3 songs for violoncello and pipa, which was commissioned by the White House, specifically written for Yo-Yo Ma and Wu Man. Now, that work is based on 3 popular folk melodies that you heard while growing up in China. Why did you pick them, and comment on the compositional process?
Well, there was a Chinese premier was visiting the U.S. and had a mission. They wanted China to join the World Trade Organizations. So they give a state dinner. So they asked the Yo-Yo Ma to play, and Yo-Yo thought it would be good to include something Chinese. So at the time, there were not many active Chinese composers. So Yo-Yo asked me if I could do something, a duo for Pipa and cello. So I did. So the first song was from Qinghai, where I stayed, folk song, very famous Qinghai folk song. I think it's perhaps the only Qinghai folk song that's well known outside Qinghai in China. And then that one. The second one is a set. Yeah, Little Cabbage. It's a slow move, slow song. And then the third one it's Tibetan dance, which, as you know, Qinghai was part of Tibet for hundreds of years. When I was there, the majority population was still Tibetan, so I learned a lot of Tibetan music as well.
And so I wanted to ask, we talked about Yo-Yo Ma. Can you talk about your involvement with the Silk Road Project and describe your relationship with Yo-Yo Ma?
In the beginning, Yo-Yo, I was the first Chinese composer. I think I worked with Yo-Yo. Actually, we were introduced through Bernstein. And I remember one time he said, do you know Yo-Yo Ma? I said, of course I know who he is. He said, he's coming for lunch. You want to come join us? And Bernstein was very kind, sort of naturally introduced us. So Yo-Yo was late. He had to do a concert at the United Nations, and he actually kept Bernstein waiting. Unbelievable. So he was late. He apologetic, and then the three of us had lunch, and that's how we met. And then we worked together on the 7 tunes heard in China was the first piece he commissioned me. And then through a few times. And then we talked about Silk Road. And I was interested in, after I left China, when I was in China, I studied folk music. And I studied Chinese classical music when I was at the conservatory, consciously studied, because I thought those were very important part I need to know more. So I just go back, if you don't mind, to Shanghai a little bit. In Shanghai, there are 2 composition departments. One is so-called Western music composition department, and the other one is called the Chinese music composition department. To this day, Shanghai Conservatory still has 2 comp departments, which is, to me, absurd. But anyway, I was in the Western side, which is you need a higher records to get in at the time anyway. If you cannot, if you didn't pass that, you might get into the Chinese part. But they offer slightly different courses. In the Chinese part, they offer more heavily on the Chinese classical music courses. And I took those. Well, no, actually, I audited those. I was sitting in the class for all these. And that was very important. So I studied Chinese history, Chinese music history, and so forth. But only after I left China, after I had been in the U.S. for a few years, did I realize that most of the Chinese music or Chinese history or culture that we were taught as part of Chinese actually came outside China. So, namely, through the Silk Road was a very big influence, especially musically. Like most of the instruments we play now, the Chinese instruments are not came from China. So then I started to be interested in looking through the history how these influence came about. So I think that was when we had a conversation with, and I had a conversation with Yo-Yo, and sparked him to have that idea, the Silk Road, because at the time was also the boundaries and all the conflicts in the world, and in the 90s, the invasion of the U.S. invasion of Iraq and all that. So, so I think that happened around that time.
You've written some very insightful articles with a lot of, like for instance, you have some of your mentions of your research at the Silk Road, and you even have a very interesting article called Bartók the Chinese Composer. In that article, you talk about a possible link between a small ethnic group called the Uyghurs, who are believed to be ancestors of the Hungarian people. You also talk about his novel approach to harnessing folk melodies. Talk about the importance of Bartók to you.
Yeah, so I was drawn to, like all the contemporary composers, drawn to Bartók, but I was more, first I was, the most superficial thing, because Bartók did some music that was pentatonic. But then I was more interested in him as a person and his aesthetics and his approach to folk music. Mostly that I think his influence still to this day is obvious in my music. That is that he managed to bring up the kind of a smelly peasant music, that to put them on the pedestal next to the classical Western, fine art music, that put them together and say, look, they're both beautiful. They're both just as good. So I think he kept, folk music, Bartók wasn't the first one. approaching folk music or bringing folk element. They're from the very beginning, and there was always folk elements, in every composer's music. Beethoven, Mozart, they all had that. But but Bartók was the first to elevate it, and he consciously kept the original kind of quality into it. So so that was my interest into being sort of, I like to be called a Chinese Bartók. So the first kind of approach with kind of folk music, because I also spend a lot of time with the folk musicians, and then, but Bartók's language was there is the Hungarian language tradition. There came from three sources. One was from the Turkish source, the Turkey, where the country is Turkey. They further moved west, migrated west. So the Turkey are related to some of the Uyghur or Uyghur traditions. And actually, I visited that village years later.
I want to talk about your 2016 opera, A Dream of the Red Chamber, commissioned by the San Francisco Opera, released to public and critical acclaim. I was amazed to find that there is a field of study in China called redology, the academic study of the novel that the opera is based upon. And these redologists, they scrutinized your work and gave it their approval, with one scholar saying that in the beginning he was analyzing it, but by a quarter of the way into it, he was totally absorbed by the story and the music. And he said, I didn't care. By the end, I was so touched. Now, that's a major undertaking. Can you talk about the opera and talk about the music, how you composed it and how you approached it?
Yeah, I was so in China, there are redologists. There are scholars spend all their life studying that one novel.
That's amazing.
And there are fans, millions of Red fans, Dream of Red Chamber, DRC fans. I was maybe one of them, and I always kept reading. You keep rereading the novel many times. As a composer, I must say I had the sort of the dream of writing an opera on that, but I didn't dare because the undertaking is so big, and you need a major opera company to take over. But moreover, I think the story is so long, is 3 times of the length of War and Peace, and so with 500 characters in the novel, how do you reduce that into an evening of opera, of 2 hours, and now it's about 2 hours and 20 minutes. Music, and how do you approach that and make the opera effective and not too clumsy? I mentioned War and Peace, like Prokofiev's last opera. He made a mistake. He couldn't got rid of some plot baggage, and you end up the opera has 2 stories. So that was confusing. They're part of the reason why that opera didn't, it was problematic. But for me, so I decided to take the story, the essence of the story, the love story, and I was charged and with David Henry Hwang. I said, we need to write a good story. I don't care if the story is not authentic, but given, then we should try to be as authentic as possible. So that's how we approach. So at the end, I think what you just told the story, which is true, very interesting, was because at the end, it's not how well you adapted the novel, it is how well you write an opera.
Since we're coming to the end, I want to just ask some fun questions now, hot seat questions. These are just fun, and you don't need to take them too seriously, but let's begin. So who are your top 3 modern composers?
Okay, so Bartók, Stravinsky, Shostakovich,
And who are your top three classical, like Bach, Mozart, Beethoven, those types?
There are too many. Three are difficult. Bach is certainly one. Beethoven, Mozart, Brahms. The list goes on. Yeah.
If you were stranded on a desert island and you could pick a couple of instruments to compose with, what are those instruments that you would choose?
Well, it'd be hard to find a piano there, but I would love to bring a piano to the island. Yeah.
Just one piano?
Oh,
you can choose a few. Yeah, you can choose a few because you're going to compose like a chamber or whatever you want. So just pick a few.
Oh, I see. Well, a piano and a violin, cello. I think I'll be content with those three.
Can you name some composers, up and coming ones that you are interested that you like?
Well, there are a lot of young composers. Recently, I just, in my admission at university, I heard a young Chinese composer who studied in Russia as an undergraduate, and I forgot his name already. So, but he got his master's at the U.S., one of the conservatories in the U.S., and he's applying to schools. Apparently, many schools. I'm thrilled that he applied to University of Michigan, where I am. I hope we can get him because he's really fantastic. And I was telling my wife, I said, this kid doesn't really need to study with anybody. He's as good as me.
What's his name?
I don't remember his name. He's from China originally. I think I need to look it up because I listened to his music. I was so thrilled to. But my wife reminded me. He said, I think you mentioned him a few years ago. He wrote to you, approached to you. But certainly now I listen to his music. I look at his scores. It was very mature. Yes, there's certain things he can still improve. But what a talent!
What's your proudest musical moment?
Proudest musical moment. I don't know. I guess when I conducted Dream of Red Chamber and I was taking a bow on stage, I saw standing ovation. And that was a pretty good moment, I would think.
What was the hardest composition of yours that you composed, like difficult, that you found really difficult and a really trying experience?
Recently, I did, after the opera, I haven't done many small chamber music pieces. So I just finished a piece, a quartet with erhu and violin, cello, and piano. And I had never written extensively for erhu and showcased the erhu. As you know, the erhu is very characteristic, but it's not part of the Western tradition. That's one reason why I was hesitant. I had the hardest time writing, but at the end, I'm happy with the results. I think I found a way to showcase the erhu properly. But still, at the time, it was a little bit of agony to write that piece. That's called the Clear Water. The piece is called the Clear Water Rhapsody.
Conversely, what was the easiest piece that you found just flowed from your fingertips to write?
Well, a few times in my life, I had dreamed a piece. You heard a piece my piano, a short piano capriccio for piano and orchestra called Red Silk Dance. I had a dream one day. I was sitting in the audience and I heard somebody, Emmanuel X, was playing that piece. And I was in the audience, and the piece was pretty good. And I woke up and I said to myself, what piece was that? It sounds familiar, but I can't pin down what piece. And I realized that was really, nobody had written that piece. That could be mine. So I wrote down the five minutes I heard in words describing what it is, And 6 months later, Emmanuel X actually asked me to write a composition for him, a piece. That was amazing. I told him I already written that piece. I told him the story. That was easy.
That was.
I wish it happens more often.
For people new to your music, can you name some pieces that you would recommend that they listen to? Some people who are interested in you, they want to just kind of dive into your music. What's a good starting place for them to go to?
It depends what kind of piece they are interested in. I have, a piece called Phoenix, which is for soprano and orchestra, which is based on Hans Christian Andersen's prose called the Phoenix, and it's a soprano and orchestra. That's a piece actually not Chinese influenced. It's mostly Western style, but I think it's a piece to get into my music. And then of course, there are Chinese pieces. There are China Dreams that actually the Singapore Symphony made the first recording. And there's a piece called the Nanking, which is a Pipa concerto that I wrote for Wuman, an orchestra in memory of the rape of Nanking incident and things like that. So those are big pieces, and there are a bunch of chamber pieces. Like one of my most played pieces is called Four Movements for Piano Trio. It's interesting that a few days ago, the Vienna Philharmonic was having a press conference in China to talk about their tour and all that. The Chinese reporter asked the president of the organization, who's a musician, said, "Does the orchestra plan to play some Chinese music?" And sort of put them in the spot, and he said, "Yes, we will certainly consider in the future that bring some Chinese pieces. But I know Bright Sheng, such as Three Movements for Piano Trio, it's a fantastic piece." Apparently, I don't even know him, so he's a cellist, a violinist in the orchestra. He had to play that piece.
Do you have any compositions you want to mention or projects you want to mention to my audience coming up next year or the end of this year?
I'll tell you what I'm working on now. I'm working on a viola concerto for a violist who is Roberto Diaz, who is the president of Curtis Institute, the best conservatory in the U.S., and he was the principal of Philadelphia Orchestra for many years, a fantastic violist, and we're working on this together. And I wanted to work with him. But in China, we're doing a concert of my violin concerto. I'm conducting a concert of 5 Chinese violin concerti in April in Shanghai, the Shanghai Symphony Hall. It's called the Shanghai Symphony Hall, yes. That we're doing that, and it's called Let Fly. I wrote for Gil Shanghai. Actually, Singapore Symphony was one of the co-commissioners, and Lan and played it, performed it with Gil.
I should end off on my final question. I'll read a quote to you, actually, which I found really profound, and I just want you to respond to it. And you said, "Throughout my life, one lesson continues to hold true, being self-taught, because no matter how many great teachers you are going to have, the best teacher you'll ever have is yourself, and that is creativity. You're forging your own path."
Yes, that is very true, and I am a strong believer of this. So now I have an 8-year-old daughter who is playing the piano, and I give her ideas, and then I say, you have to do something about it, being playful. And I want her to find her way to being playful. So she would say, "Oh, you tell me which one to do this way or that way." I said, "No, you do it." And that's a lot easier. She would like to. She has a strong personality. She'd like to do it herself. And she would do it much better than I would ever thought of. So I think that is the way, because people wonder about whether you're a performer artist, especially you're creative artist. People talk about finding your own voice. What is your own voice? That is your DNA. It's not the style you're using. It's the DNA, your personality. And you could be a twin. You were born, two of you were born a minute apart, but the personality would be completely different. And you're finding what is your personality, and you can translate that, express that through your work without any technical difficulty to hinder yourself of the expression and make yourself free to expression. And that is the best way of teach yourself.
That's a really great note to end on. Bright, it's been such a pleasure to talk to you. You're one of the top guys in the world for composing. You're really just one of the greats. And really, I'm really appreciative that you took the time out to talk to me and my audience. And we got to listen to so much of your great stories and your experience. All the best for the rest of the day. And I really hope to talk to you soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.